broad criteria in rubrics. I'm going to give you some samples in a few minutes to look at, and then we won't be terribly long. Using double or multiple barrel criteria, you know, inside the box, having 2 or 3 things that you're looking at, double barrel criteria. Failing to include all possible performance outcomes. Using overlapping performance descriptors, i.e. you can't tell the difference between a proficient and an emerging, or between a proficient and an exemplary because they're so overlapping, and therefore would lead to subjectivity and arbitrariness, which are not kosher. Using subjective terms, performance level labels, or inconsequential terms to differentiate performance levels. We'll look at some of those. Failing to maintain the integrity of target learning outcomes, a common result of having multiple levels of mastery. So the suggestion is that, now I don't know how, if you've built a rubric in the past, what your process has been. I've done it wrong lots of times. I have often gone in and started with the 4 level and then gone 4, 3, 2, 1. Sometimes I've started with the unacceptable in 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's not the way it ought to be done, according to the experts. What we ought to do is develop our target mastery level. That's our proficient level. We develop the proficient level first and then work out both ways from there. What is our expectation for success with this particular assignment, artifact, or whatever it is? What is our expectation for success? And to put it in the dean's words, what is our expectation for the first-year teacher in the field, right? What is our expectation for the first-year teacher in the field to be able to do? And we populate that third category, that proficient level first. And then we try to evaluate, well, what blows it out the top? What is exceptional? What's that rare situation where a student just goes above and beyond? And then what reflects some achievement but is not yet there, but they seem to get a handle on it and it's sort of emerging, right? And then what would evidence total unsuccess in that particular assignment artifact? What would be unacceptable, okay? So building them out like that helps. One of the problems that Dr. Tomei has said he sees in rubrics all the time is the differentiation between the proficient and the exceptional levels. And one of the anathema things, one of the things you cannot do, and I've got rubrics where I've done this, and our whole faculty evaluation rubric in the College of Education does this, so we've got to revise it if we want it to be good. You cannot differentiate levels based on a simple number of things they do, like they do 3 here and 2 here, and you know.
Which almost all of our rubrics.
A lot of them are. A lot of them are. You know, but and here's the logic there. If they just differ in the number of the things that they present, does that say anything about quality? 0, right? They could be 3 good ones and 2 good ones, or 3 lousy ones and 2 lousy ones. I mean, it doesn't say anything about quality, only about the number. So that's the reason why you cannot, in an effective approved, CAPE approved rubric, differentiate levels by simply differentiating the number of things they do.
Now, I asked this, I know we beat this over and over again, but I'm constantly thinking specifically about our research classes. What if that number of whatever has a bar set to it, like it has to be 10 references, and those references have to come from peer-reviewed journals within the last 2 years that, you know, are within a certain. So basically, there is that amount, but that amount also distinguishes a quality within that.
Mm-hmm. I would say there is a way to do that, and I'm going to show you some rubrics that are are fairly acceptable, and they're going to do exactly what I just said. They're going to put numbers in there. But if a person has to have 10 references and they have to be since 2010 and whatever 10 references, I'd put that at the proficient level. I'd leave the emerging blank, and I'd put unacceptable as anything less than that.
And keep that line item open.
Keep the line item.
Start adding things.
Don't add things to it, but they've got the 10 references meeting the date criteria and all that sort of thing, and you've said that's the bar, that's the benchmark, those numbers. Then anything less than that would be unacceptable, would it not? So I wouldn't even have another level there. I just have 2 levels. That's the other thing. You don't have to populate every level. Here's another thing that just was this is so simple, but it was so new to me in terms of concept. He said there are universities using their performance assessments, like their field experience assessment, CEOI, that the first time they use that in their first practicum, they black out the 3 and 4 level. It's not even possible to score them at a 3 or 4. Because you don't expect the student who's a junior first semester in their first practicum experience in the field to be proficient or much less exemplary. You don't expect that. Now, I'm not saying I would do that, because I do believe there are students who are gifted and they get it from day one and they are good. Right? And if they're really good, they deserve to be scored. But you get the point, right? Is that most often a 3 and a 4 won't even apply the first time they present a lesson in a school. We would expect them to be emerging. But does that mean if they got a 2, they don't get an A for the class? No. That's what you would expect the first time out. So that's the difference in an assessment rubric and a scoring rubric, and those are 2 different things. And even though Dr. Herring talked about using them as a scoring rubric, which they're built to do, our interest in our case is not for scoring, but for assessment and student improvement. Okay? But do that as you want. I have the handout, and this information is on the handout if you can't see the board. Here are examples of overly broad criteria. No evidence in the unsatisfactory. Now, here's the other thing. You notice that in this they go from unsatisfactory to distinguished. They go the 1, 2, 3, 4. We talked about this a lot, and we came to the conclusion, I think it was pretty unanimous, that we ought to go 4, 3, 2, 1, because the first thing we want the student to see is top level. The first thing we want them to read is what the top level would be, 4, 3, 2, 1, rather than the other way around. I think it just is a psychological thing, maybe. So that's what we'll try to do. But honestly, individually, it doesn't matter, because LiveText is going to pull the data based on the number, the 4, the 3, the 2, the 1. It doesn't matter what order you put them in. You can have 4, 2, 3, 1. It doesn't matter. LiveText is going to pull the data according to the number that you assign. Does that make sense? Okay. No evidence of review of assessment data. Modification of inadequate modification of instruction. Instruction does not provide evidence of assessment strategies. That's unsatisfactory. There's a lot of real vague language there. In the developing category, instruction provides evidence of alternative assessment strategies. Some instructional goals are assessed. Some? What's some? Some? Does that mean some of one or more than one? Some evidence of review of assessment data. And then in the proficient, your desirable category, alternative assessment strategies are indicated in plans. Lessons provide evidence of instructional modification based on learners' needs. There's no description there of what kind of evidence or how it's written into plans. Candidate reviews assessment data to inform instruction. How are you going to know that? It's just very vague, very broad categories.
That would need to be either 2 or 3 line items, right? Because they have 3 different distinct things there in the provision.
Yeah, that's another problem with it. But even there, Dr. Stobbs, those 3 things are too vague themselves.
Right.
Here's an example of a double barrel criterion. A lot of our rubrics have double barrel, triple barrel criterions. I'm sure. In the developing lesson plan references applicable to P12 standards or appropriate instructional materials, but not both. And then the proficient lesson plan references applicable P12 standards and identifies appropriate instructional strategies. In other words, they're having two things in each level. A lot of ours do that, I know. Overlapping performance levels. In the bold print, the unsatisfactory makes 2 or more errors when describing activities. Developing makes no more than 2 errors. Okay? You already see the discrepancy there? No more than 2. They may have 2 and be developing, but they got 2 that are unsatisfactory also. Right? So what does that lead to? What's that going to do to integrator reliability? Because if Valerie gives it a 1 and Janet gives it a 2, they're both right, but integrator reliability is destroyed with subjectivity. Makes no more than 1 error. And then distinguish provides complete, accurate learning activity instruction to students. That's a broad descriptive thing there too. Overlapping performance levels. And that's so easy to do, isn't it? Possible gap in performance level. Here's the opposite of that, where you're leaving out a performance level. The lesson plan does not include any instructional materials. Instructional materials are missing for 1 or 2 parts. Instructional materials for all parts are listed. Instructional materials for all parts are listed, directly relate to the learning objectives, and are developmentally appropriate. The only difference between 3 and 4, between proficient and distinguished, is are developmentally appropriate. Well, do you mean you're going to give somebody a proficient if they don't do a developmentally appropriate plan? Isn't that a given? Should be. Okay. And then you have 1 or 2 parts, and then for all, so you don't know what's in between there. You don't know how many parts there are to begin with. So there's a missing gap in the middle of that one somewhere. But on the surface, it sort of makes sense. Double barrel descriptors, again, use of subjective terms. This is really, oh boy, old Tom here is bad about this. Unsatisfactory. Candidate shows a weak degree of understanding. Candidate shows a relatively weak degree of understanding. Candidate shows a moderate degree. And Dr. Tomine, in evaluating a similar rubric, said, I have yet to have anybody to be able to describe the difference to me between weak and relatively weak. Again, there's no way you can have inter-rater reliability with that because it's so subjective and no criteria there. And candidate shows a high degree. What's the difference between moderate and high? You know.